Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today is February the 20th, and it's been a little while since I made an astrology video. Currently, the sun has just ingressed into Pisces, so it's the beginning of Pisces season, which already feels like a bit of a shift, a different change in energy. We previously had a large stellium in Aquarius, and there's still Mercury, Venus and Mars and Pluto. So there's still a four-planet stellium in Aquarius, but I find just with the sun having moved into Pisces, there's a little bit less of this sort of like kind of cold, steely, intellectual kind of Aquarius energy and a little bit more of the heart-centered, emotional thing that comes from Pisces, particularly. Pisces is the exaltation of Venus, it's the domicile of Jupiter. There is Saturn in Pisces, which gives it a bit of a melancholy feeling. And there is an interesting triple conjunction. It's a double Cazimi triple conjunction coming up with Sun, Mercury, and Saturn in Pisces. But as I make this video, Mercury is still in the late degrees of Aquarius, and it won't ingress into Pisces for at least a few more days. Mercury has recently just undergone a square to Uranus, and that has some bearing on what I'm talking about for this video. We'll get there, but the main thing that I'm thinking of for this video is the conjunction of Venus and Mars in Aquarius, which is going to be taking place over the next few days after I record this video. They're going to be perfectly conjoined. And the conjunction of Venus and Mars has been kind of an ongoing thing because they were together in Capricorn around the time when we had that Pluto ingress into Aquarius. And then I believe the last video I made was about Mars conjunct Pluto in Aquarius. And then what happened was around Valentine's Day, it was like right after Valentine's Day that Venus moved into Aquarius and conjoined Pluto. And I have my routine is, one of the I don't know if I have to give the whole story, but I am living with my mother and sister. I moved back after, what was it, like a year or so of COVID, and I got seriously ill in 2021, and then in my recovery, I made this resolution because people were telling me with the kind of sickness that I had that it was good to try to like come up with healthier daily routine, healthier lifestyle choices and stuff like that. And I have these two little dogs who are actually in their senior years, but they look pretty. They have what dogs look like, puppies their whole lives. But even though they're older dogs, they still have tons of energy. And so I just figured, I need to, for having a healthy lifestyle, I'm going to walk these dogs every day, and I've done that for a couple of years now, or at least I've been in the habit for doing it a while. But there's something about this morning routine that, although it's kind of, at first I had an aversion to it because it was so boring, but different things come up each day that kind of makes it interesting, right? And what happened, there's a certain thing when you're walking your dogs, and sometimes when there's a lot of other neighbors out who walk dogs, and sometimes the dogs will say hi to each other and like sniff each other, and then you have a polite like, how you doing, neighbor? Okay, good day, right? And then other times you can tell that people are just not in the mood. And when people, you can tell when people are just not into it, that there's a certain friction, and the dogs are kind of snarly and barky and stuff like that, more so than usual. Basically, the day, it could have been this is what happened. First of all, there was a woman walking a larger dog who was dressed all in black. It was the day after Valentine's Day. She did not look like she was in a very good mood, and her dog was a bit snarly or whatever. And then after that, I was walking down the street and there was a man who was taking his children to school, walking a dog that was like a smaller kind of spaniel or something like that. And one thing that's kind of interesting about this is that I find, as you know, because I'm the age where I look fairly young. I kind of have youthful looks despite my becoming into my whatever. I'm in my late 30s now. You know, I'm a little. There's that kind of aversion of like the fact that 40 years old is looming around the corner in a few years. But there's something about the whole. There's a certain tension that I find that I'm not going to unpack it all right now, but of living in near a elementary school where there are a lot of parents with a lot of children around, and basically, I don't know. I mean, I don't have to explain myself, but I am not married. I don't have kids. I don't really have any. There's some people that I've met who, regardless of getting married, say they're interested, they have a desire to have children. Like, even if they would just adopt children and become a parent, just like, I don't really have this sort of impulse or whatever. But nonetheless, there are a lot of parents and a lot of families around. And what, in the same way that there may be, if you're walking, if I'm a man, there may be certain friction or tension going along around if I'm walking a dog and I walk past a female neighbor or something. But if there's a man who's a father with a bunch of children, I mean, I don't know. There's in that air the day, all the dogs seemed extra kind of snarly and barky and stuff like that. But what was interesting about this particular occasion is after I had passed the man on the street and had continued walking down the street for, I don't know, a few meters at least, I heard his children call out, "Oh no, get him!" And then the man had let go of the dog's leash, and the dog was chasing after me and my dog. So not only just barking, but chasing after me and my dogs down the street, trying to attack one of my dogs. And then I held my dogs back, and the guy got the dog and carried on. And there's something about this where, you know, this sort of interaction, doesn't happen every single day, but it happened right after Valentine's Day when the planet Venus had just ingressed into Aquarius and was conjunct Pluto with Mars. And there's this kind of thing about like, there's something here about when there can be a certain sense of friction going on that if it's not expressed at the human level, the animals are certainly picking it up, and the animals are certainly acting out this thing that humans aren't acting out, right? And there's something about what I've been noticing about just being a person in an environment with other people. Well, let me just segue into another thing that's on my mind, and I'll loop back into what my point here. Well, while Mercury was going through a square to Uranus, I suddenly had this inclination to sign up for this AI art program called Midjourney again. And the reason for this is that I make electronic music. I don't really know if I'm ever going to have any success with it, or if I'm going to start playing shows or something, or if it's just a hobby. But nonetheless, I record a lot of electronic music, and I have certain pieces that I feel like, you know, I usually release on Bandcamp. I was thinking like, maybe I could make like a music video, and I could like use the AI art to like put together some sort of a story or a music video. And I had been avoiding using these AI art programs for a while because, for one thing, and this I think goes with Aquarius being kind of like this technological, innovative kind of quality with Aquarius, and Venus having to do with aesthetics and art and stuff like that, right? That there is something going on where, well, first of all, I decided to stop using Midjourney, and I know a lot of artistic people And I decided to pay one of my friends for some artwork last year rather than, because I didn't want to just generate endless album covers with AI without putting much effort into it, and like I have art be treated as this thing where nobody really needs visual artists anymore, because we can just generate a bunch of stuff that looks nice at the press of a button. And there's no reason to pay people who are creatives and artists for their work. We can just have computers do it instead. I really don't like that side of the whole AI thing. But the other side of it is it can be just used as a tool, and it doesn't necessarily have to replace or threaten the work of visual artists, right? But nonetheless, there's that kind of tension. But there's something about the Mercury squaring Uranus that I just decided, I'm just going to give in, sign up. I can always cancel later. I can maybe generate some images for some music videos, and then I don't have to make build my life around it or something, right? And then so in the process of making, like, one of the ideas I had was to make a story that would be kind of like a movie, and you could have characters talking to each other or something like that actually had like a plot or something. And I started running into some of the limitations with the technology. And I was what I find interesting sometimes with this stuff is that the limitations or the glitches or the errors are sometimes more interesting than what it does correctly, right? And one of the things that I noticed about this is that, like, I had this idea that I was going to make a detective story, right? And I was going to have a character who's a detective interviewing other characters, right? So if you think about a detective, maybe he's wearing like a trench coat, maybe, like, he looks like a police guy or something, right? And then I was thinking, like, okay, so let's have the detective interviewing a Buddhist monk, right? And what was interesting was that it did this thing where it made the detective look more like a monk, like it gave him a bald head, and it made the Buddhist monk not really look a little bit more like a detective. So it kind of, like, there's two things that I wanted to be distinct. It kind of mixed them together and jumbled them up a little bit. And then so I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna have a guy who looks like maybe like a typical, guy, like what do dudes, your usual dude usually wear? Maybe like a plaid jacket and a baseball hat or something like that, right? I'm gonna have a guy like that talking to a Buddhist monk. And then it sort of made it so that, like, maybe the Buddhist monk was wearing a bit more orange or something like that. But it was like when you try, there's sometimes I can get this, I can have two very distinct kinds of characters talking to each other. But what often happens is that the traits or qualities from one character seems to contaminate or color the other character's traits, right? In the same, so there's a certain sense that, like, I thought this was kind of interesting, because I kind of wonder if there's some sort of, like, thing. I don't know if you could program an AI software to be better about this, or if it's something to do with how it's programmed, or if you could make an AI software that does things differently, or if this is something that has to do with how I don't know. I'm not going to get into those details. But okay, why do I bring this up in relation to this encounter with the barky dogs and the neighbors and stuff like that? Is that I was reflecting on the way that the planet Venus has to do with harmonizing, right? And what harmony is like when you play two notes on a piano or an instrument. Do they resonate in a chord that is harmonious together? Do they resonate in a way that's agreeable to the ear? And then Mars, on the other hand, is all about either separating things, like a surgeon with a scalpel who needs to cut something out, or like somebody who is maintains their individuality or their independence, where somebody, if somebody's saying you need to be like us, but somebody says, no, I'm going to be like myself, I'm going to retain my own independent, sense of self, and I don't have to do everything like you do it, right? So there's something in with Venus and Mars together, and there's also this thing. Okay, I'm kind of getting distracted here, but one thing that I notice is that I often do you guys watching this video relate to the same thing, that if you are just walking down the street and there's something about you that is a certain way, and you are surrounded by other people who are different in one way or another, does you feel some sort of unconscious pressure that you have to be like the people around you, right? And like, this could be like, if you are walking past, like, let's say you're walking down the road and a bunch of guys are building a fence, right? They're cutting pieces of wood down to size, and they're hammering, they're putting the fence up. Is there some sort of thing, does that give you the sense that you're like, well, I don't know anything about woodworking, but the fact that there's all these people doing this around makes me feel like I ought to be doing what these guys are doing. Or if you're like, I don't have a wife and children, but when I go for a walk and all I see are husbands and wives with their children, it makes me feel like I ought to be doing what these people are doing, right? Or do you have a sense of like, people around you can be doing all sorts of things and you can just be yourself regardless, right? And there's something about the thing about Venus, and one thing that's kind of interesting about Venus is that I don't think the principle of harmonizing necessarily means making things identical with each other. Although at the same time, when you think about what is in harmony with each other, there are things that are a little bit different, but not so different as to create a really discordant clash, right? But there's this kind of, and there's this thing going on with Venus and Mars where it's like there's this friction or tension where one force wants to kind of group things together that complement each other, right? Like, as if you were to make a meal and you were to like select, what condiment goes the best with this meal, what sauce or seasoning goes the best with this meal, or what would be kind of out of place and a clash. And then there's something about like Mars, people often talk about being the quality of spiciness, right? And it could be like you have one of your sauces is a hot sauce and the other one is like guacamole, right? Which are they're contrasting, but they complement each other in such a way where you're like, oh, I've ate too much hot sauce. Oh, well, I'll cool it down with some guacamole or some sour cream or some, like that there's things that are, just because they're different doesn't mean that they don't complement each other, right? And so there's this kind of thing with the basic socialization and stuff like that, where I see it, what's interesting is to go back to this AI software, and it's like you're to try to create a image that contains different elements that retain their own unique suchness as defined characters. But there's something about the way that AI works, is that AI doesn't seem to have a sense of the, like, it looks at things in terms of like interchangeable parts, right? Like, you could say, I'm going to have a guy wearing a denim jacket with a baseball hat talking to a guy who's wearing a very formal businessman suit and tie and stuff like that. Very different, right? And I'm going to have these two talking to each other, right? And then what the AI software does is it makes these interesting mistakes where even if it 3 pictures, it'll get it right, but then it'll be like, oh, but maybe you want the baseball hat on the guy who's wearing the business suit and tie. And maybe you want the guy in the denim jacket to have a tie too. Like, it just looks at things as if they are interchangeable parts, and that if 2 things are in the frame with each other, that things can get mixed up, or that the qualities of the characters start to blur into each other in such a way that is it doesn't, it can be kind of surreal, right? And I think that I'm starting to play around with this because there's something about the idea of like happy accidents, right? Where it's like things happen that I wasn't intending, but it's kind of like the accidents can be more interesting than what I'm intentionally trying to do, right? And that is also a principle that I apply with experimental electronic music. A lot. What I really love about electronic music is not so much trying to have a preconceived idea and then having like this laser sharp focus to be like, I'm going to achieve the specific result I want. It's kind of more about this, wait a minute, what if I try putting this and this together? I've never done that before. What would that? And sometimes, honestly, sometimes it doesn't work out well, and sometimes things happen that I wasn't expecting that just blow me away. And so there's this exciting process of discovery that I'm kind of late with doing a Mercury Uranus video, but there's something about Aquarius that has to do with this idea of not just progress, but experimentation and this kind of creative playing around, exploring the possibilities. Sometimes what comes out of it, the thing about experiment, sometimes the results aren't so good and you just have to throw them away, but sometimes you get things that are pretty cool out of it, right? So where am I going with all this? So that was kind of a bit of the Mercury-Uranus dynamic. And of course, you can also put together that we've got Venus and Mars in this conjunction in Aquarius, and they are going to be squaring Jupiter, they're going to be squaring Uranus. So there's something about this experimental, progressive kind of process that applies to the Venus and Mars conjunction as well. And there's something about, there's something also, a little detail about this whole the friction with neighbors and the pressure. There's the question of am I in harmony with my environment? Am I in harmony with my family that I live with? Am I in harmony with the neighbors around me? Am I in harmony with the city, the community that I am a citizen of? And is there some sort of contrast, or is there some sort of friction there? And there's something about Venus and Mars together as kind of like mythologically they were illicit lovers who stand for polar opposites in terms of principles. As Venus loves peace, Venus loves things that agree with each other and complement each other, whereas Mars is all about this masculine kind of warfare and independence and all this kind of stuff, right? But what I notice is that when it comes to relationships and stuff like that, and attraction, is that often Venus and Mars work together, I find, in that it's not like a zero-sum game whether you find somebody appealing or attractive or something like that. That somebody could have traits and qualities that you really appreciate, and then those could be co-present, coexisting with other traits that really piss you off, or that you may find a turn-off, or like traits that make you question whether you are really attracted to this person or not, right? And I think we've all been there. There's some people give the example that like in your honeymoon phase, you may be so awash with hormones and the butterflies, and that you just kind of overlook all the things that could be problematic, and then as the relationship goes on over the course of time, the things that you don't like about the person come to the surface more so than the things that you do like. But I think that there's always, in attraction, there's always some kind of friction. Or, like, I think, have you also noticed this? There's this quality that is like, I'm not going to name any names here, but like you may find somebody who has a YouTube channel or a podcast or a content creator who makes interesting content that is right up your alley, that you're into, but it could be like you appreciate what this person is making and what this person has to say, or their personality even, but up to a point, right? There could be something where it's like, this is really cool, I really like what this person's putting down, but there's some sort of like point where it hits the wall of friction where you're kind of like, you're like, as much as I like this it balances out with the other property where you're like, I like this person, what they're doing enough to listen and follow along and whatever, continue to be interested in what they're putting out. But then it runs into this point where, this whole thing about like, I guess the whole thing about having arguments or debates, like I don't like the word debate. It sounds too much like, like these, the debate club guys who are like, I'm going to crush you with facts and logic and my superior argument, like there's something about the whole climate of like online socialization where nobody really wants to get in an argument, like a real debate where it's my idea versus your idea. And I think I don't use Twitter though. Apparently this stuff happens on Twitter all the time, and it's just people having these really like snappy little, because like, Twitter you can only use so many characters in one thing. So instead of having having a nuanced, longer conversation, it's people trying to like attack and defend, and having these little, like, nobody really. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people still use Twitter. I don't. I never got into it really. But I think there's something about where it's like you can still. There's something about the Venus and Mars and Aquarius dynamic. And especially considering that Aquarius is an air sign, has a certain kind of like intellectual or scientific, or I don't know what to say about it. Like, there's something about it that lends itself to a certain dialogue or conversation or the abstract ideas. And with the Venus is like, there could be like people who you're in enough resonance with, enough agreeance with to put you that you're paying attention, but then you run it. The Mars thing is kind of like I like what you're putting down up to a point, but then there is this thing that creates friction that I actually have a disagreement. And the thing about this is that it's often people would be like, I've also heard it, people express this online, that they don't like the feeling that people are only listening or reading or consuming content to look for that one thing to disagree with, and then to post. But I mean, like, it's kind of, isn't it? To me, it seems a bit childish to be like, I'm going to make stuff and put it out there, but people are only allowed to agree with me, and if you disagree, I don't want to hear about it. I mean, I guess if that's your attitude, you're welcome to be like that. But my point with the Venus and Mars thing is that there's this kind of I feel like both of these things kind of go together. Like, you can't, if there's just one is too one-sided. But when Venus and Mars are conjoined together, these things too are mixed up so that there could be, enough agreement to bring people into the same space. And then the Mars is there to create a disagreement where there is a argument or a clash of opinions or different directions where you could go with it, and it doesn't have to be like a melting pot where, like in the AI software, if you put the guy wearing a denim jacket and a trucker hat beside a guy in a suit and tie smoking a pipe, then all of a sudden it doesn't understand that it starts mixing them up. Like, oh, let's give the guy with the whatever, we're gonna give the businessman a trucker hat and just switch everything around because they're in the same frame together, right? But I almost feel like there's a sort of like underlying anxiety. Like, personally, I live in a very multicultural area and stuff like that, but there's a sort of like, did you notice that there's a certain, one of the underlying things with xenophobia is like the AI software. It's like people have this suspicion that if somebody is pictured in the same frame as you, and they are in some way, even if they're just wearing different clothing, it's like, well, if I don't like baseball hats, and all my neighbors wear baseball hats, it's like I'm under some sort of threat that one day I'm just going to, like, some sort of thing is going to take over, and I'm going to go out and buy a baseball hat, even if I don't want to. I'm going to start wearing a baseball hat just so I can blend in with my neighbors and not feel this pressure, like they're all looking at me like the one guy who's not wearing a baseball hat, right? And then, like, you know, like there's this, it could, I don't, there's not just the pressure to conform, it's kind of like this, like, like, do we tolerate differences, or do we feel like all differences are trying to, as Deleuze and Guattari would say, reterritorialize us, right? Like, we're all, like, everything around that is like, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't bring up Deleuze and Guattari, because then it just reminds me, they have a book called Difference and Repetition, which I haven't read yet, but I'm still trying to work my way through 1,000 Plateaus. So maybe after I finish 1,000 Plateaus, I'll get to Difference and Repetition. But I mean, the name even, right, is in there with the Venus and Mars conjunction in Aquarius. Are we attracted to people? Are we attracted by the polarity of differences? Like, this is another thing. Like, if you are attracted to a mate or a partner, is it because that person shares all the same tastes as you, that they dress the same as you, that they like the same movies and music? Or are you attracted to people who have a quality that is in some kind of a polarity, that the person represents something that is fundamentally other, and that your experience with this other person gives you an experience that you wouldn't be able to have by yourself. It's not just like, oh, I'm just watching all my favorite movies and now I have a friend to join me, that this person is like, well, have you heard about this stuff? No, I didn't think so, because I'm coming from a world that is a unique, different, other world than the one you're familiar with. And isn't it lovely and wonderful that in this meeting that we get to have an exchange where you get to be exposed to something that is fundamentally different, and that this difference can be respected in the sense that it doesn't have to reterritorialize you. It doesn't have to colonize you. You don't have to get indoctrinated into a program of conformity where everybody levels out at the same lowest common denominator. We can actually respect our differences and still have an interaction or an exchange. Or on the other hand, maybe that is just too threatening. Maybe the potential of something that is different could be so potentially threatening that it has to be excluded, because there's a fear that it could, like, corrupt, or that a fear that it could damage, or something like that, right? And so that we have, which brings this sort of like an intensification of this sort of conformity, you know. But the thing is, when Venus and Mars are in Aquarius, and they're both going to be squaring both Jupiter and Uranus having to do more with, I would say, surprising or shocking displays of nonconformity, or a kind of an impulse towards experimentation and innovation. I don't think the tendency is going to be towards playing it safe in terms of just reaffirming the status quo for the sake of protecting conformity to some kind of pre-existing social order. With the astrological dynamic, I don't think that's what's going to be happening. Okay, so that's basically my idea for this video. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for my next one. Thank you very much.